Went to Oral Roberts University. If you follow March Madness, Sweet 16 this year. Anybody there with the Cinderella story this year? It's all right, you don't care. It was fun for me at least. So went to ORU. Like she said, have done video production ever since. My degree was in broadcast journalism, so I was a news reporter and then a sports reporter for a while in South and North Dakota. Worked for the Timberwolves for a couple of years, Timberwolves and Lynx in their video department. And then came to work here for a couple of years. Wife and I recently, well now it's not even that recently, 5 years ago, moved to San Diego. Lived there for a couple of years for her job and then came back and I'm working video there again. While I was there, I wrote this book. It's called Everything I Know I Learned from Sports. It's a one-year devotional. So what I tell people when talking about this book is that God speaks to me through sports. And I think a free plug for all of you, whether you like sports or not, is just letting you know that God knows how to speak to you. And maybe it is sports like it is for me. Maybe it's through music. Maybe it's through books, through reading, through movies. God created you. He knows how to speak to you. A lot of us think it's so difficult to hear the voice of God because we think it needs to be difficult. And we try so hard. And really, God knows how to speak to you. God knows your language. God, a lot of times that voice in your own head, a lot of times that's just God trying to talk to you. So listen to him. For me, I'll be watching a Vikings game and a play will happen. He'll say, I work just like that sometimes. And so I started writing those down, got to 366 because it came out right before 2020, which was a leap year. So it's a full year devotional. There's no dates or anything, so you can start it any time. I want to give one copy away right now. So are there any sports fans? Okay, so I'm going to weed it down a little bit. Did anybody watch the NFL draft this last weekend? Can somebody tell me the name of the local Minnesota kids from Marshall, Minnesota that got drafted 3rd overall by the San Francisco 49ers? Your hand's been up this whole time, so I got to trust you. What's his name?
Andrew.
What was that? Trey Lance. Bonus points if you can tell me what college you went to.
I went to NDSU.
Yes, North Dakota State. You want to come up and grab this book? What's your name?
Andrew.
Andrew, nice to meet you. Yeah, Trey Lance is a local Minnesota kid from Marshall, Minnesota, who went to NDSU. He was a quarterback, was just drafted 3rd overall by the San Francisco 49ers, which was pretty cool. And I actually met, this is a long story that we don't have time to tell, but I met one of his mentors, who he's involved in Fellowship of Christian Athletes back in Marshall, Minnesota. And I've been doing work with FCA the last couple of years. And I actually met her and she was like, I guess his little brother is a senior now down at Marshall, who's going to go to NDSU as a wide receiver. But she was talking about how he's such a good guy, a good leader, a good Christian, and his little brother's maybe even more sold out than he is. So pretty cool to hear that. Did you have a hand up, somebody? Yeah, so Fellowship of Christian Athletes is a nationwide, actually they're international now, ministry that's been around forever, specifically working mostly with high school coaches and athletes, spreading Jesus through the world of sports is their motto. So I've been doing some video work with them, so highly recommend you guys get involved in FCA if you guys play sports. Even if you don't, it's open to anybody. So can't say enough good stuff about FCA. All right, I got just a few minutes here, so I'm going to get into it. When I was asked to speak, in my mind, the first thought was, okay, let's try to find a topic that's relevant to middle school kids in 2001. So I was trying to think like 2021, sorry. So I was trying to think, actually that's when I was in middle school, but trying to think back of what I thought about the world in middle school and what I would want to hear about. And I was like, there's no way that translates. There's no way the stuff that I was dealing with would deal with. Even if I could in my mind get back to think about that long ago, there's no way it would translate to what you guys are thinking about. So instead, I was like, I'm just going to talk to you guys about what I've been thinking about and dealing with over the last, I'll say at least a couple of weeks, but it's really been longer. First example is you guys have just been through and seen a lot more just the last year and a half than I did when I was in middle school. I didn't have to think about wearing a mask to school to not catch a disease. I didn't have to think about just a lot of the different stuff that you guys are going through right now. You think about the police shootings in our own backyard. I don't know how much you guys think about it as middle schoolers, but the one in Minneapolis was close enough, and now this one in Brooklyn Center is 5 blocks from where my grandparents and where my dad grew up. So you guys might be dealing with some of this stuff as well. If you're not, I promise I'll throw in a little bit of plugs that will apply to everybody. And if you're not here yet and you're like, I'm just in middle school and I'm not even gonna worry about it, then remember this for when stuff comes up, right? So I titled this message Thoughts and Prayers because I don't know, but whenever tragedy strikes, you hear people talk about thoughts and prayers for whatever city, whatever family, whatever. And then ultimately, in response to thoughts and prayers, you hear people saying, thoughts and prayers aren't enough. What do thoughts and prayers do? Let's actually do something. And they're trying to push legislation or they're trying to do different things. But I've heard plenty of people downplay it. Maybe you've downplayed it yourself. I've myself questioned, like, is thoughts and prayers enough? What can we actually do? So I want to start with, and these are my notes. I'm not just texting, just so you guys know. I don't want you guys to think that I'm texting during chapel, because you're not supposed to do that. I don't see any of you guys doing it. You guys are better than that. But so my first reaction to thoughts and prayers is, you can keep your thoughts. I don't really care. Good thoughts are better than bad thoughts, I suppose. And there's a lot about positive thinking and good vibes and all that. And that's fine. Like I said, it's better than negative thoughts and bad thoughts, but thoughts don't do a whole lot if there's not something there. And the reason why prayer means something is because there's actually some truth behind it, and there's actually a spiritual realm that we live in. Like I said, I grew up in this church. I didn't always take it that seriously. I've heard the verse. How many of you guys have heard the verse Ephesians 6:12? For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places. How many of you guys maybe heard that verse? It's a pretty popular verse if you grew up in the church. And first and foremost, it says that we're not wrestling against flesh and blood. So our battle's never against people. So whether you're talking about racial divides or political divides or religious divides or gender, whatever that looks like, your fight's never with another person. Even in school, if it's a bully, somebody picking on you, somebody that excludes you, or any of that, like none of that, your fight is never against that other person. There's a spiritual something happening that we don't see. And like I said, I downplayed that most of my life growing up in the church, but more and more I think it's harder to ignore that. And there is real spiritual stuff going on, right? You're at Maranatha Christian Academy, so to some extent, you have to, if you believe in Jesus, if you believe in Christ, then angels and demons and all that goes with it. So not to get spooky and weird and sidetracked on that, but you can keep your thoughts if they're just good thoughts, but prayers absolutely change something. Prayers absolutely make a difference. And I can't encourage you enough to pray. Whether it's something in your own life you're going through, big or small, not sitting by you at lunch, not having lunch money. Maybe it's a bigger deal with your parents or your family, or it's, people getting shot in our own neighborhood. Prayers absolutely make a difference, and prayers are so important. I think a lot of us downplay the spiritual side of things because we lump them together as thoughts and prayers is just another thing, or maybe we think, oh, those are all good things, but if you're not praying to someone, then what's the point? Your thoughts, your positive thinking, your good vibes, there's a lot of that, like right now, like people just kind of embracing spirituality or embracing goodness and just being a good person. And without an actual something behind it, if you don't actually believe in God and serve Him and Jesus Christ, then your thoughts don't mean a whole lot and really don't do any good. But prayer is more than just thinking good things. It's literally affecting the spiritual world that we don't see. And that's hugely important because we can fight battles that we don't even see. This talks about wrestling against flesh and blood. How do you wrestle? It's through prayer, right? It's easy for me to get in a fight with a person because I can see them, I can take a swing, but in the spiritual realm, we do our fighting through prayer. So if you believe in God, the devil, angels, demon, the spiritual realm, that's how we fight is through prayer. And so when we have, like I said, tragedies in our city or just whatever you're going through in your personal life, it's so important to pray and never downplay prayers. And not only should, you've probably heard this is a little cliche, I wrote it down, but prayer should not be your last resort, but your first response. And I know sometimes prayer is all we can do, right? When you look at maybe some of the things that are going on in the world right now, you're like, I'm one person, what can I do? Well, you can pray. That doesn't, not to downplay prayer, not to say that that's the only thing you can do, but prayer is important. And like I said, should be your first response in every situation, whether you know what to do or don't know what to do. Prayer can always be your response and should always be your response. I believe that prayer is powerful. Believe in the power of prayer. I believe prayer is important. But the thing is, prayer, God uses people to answer prayers. So whatever your prayer might be, it's probably going to get answered by a person. Not necessarily, I believe in the miraculous. I believe God can do stuff without us knowing. But an easy example for me is financial blessing. If you need money, right? You can't afford whatever your parents got laid off and you can't afford whatever you need to afford. The money you need is probably going to come from another person. It's probably not going to happen. It's probably not going to materialize and rain down from the sky. It's probably going to be someone giving you money, or it's maybe your parents have a connection with somebody to get them a new job. It's probably going to come through another person. God uses people. Normally when I speak, I only talk in sports analogies, but I wasn't sure how many people would understand them. So I'm just going to throw one in today, and it's super cheesy and super cliche, but if God's your coach, he's the one that draws the plays, but he needs the players to actually execute. So that's why God uses people. So God has a plan, right? Read the Bible, it's in there plenty about God having a plan, but he needs people to execute on this earth, to execute his plan on this earth. So you throwing around prayers, God might want to use me to answer your prayer, but if I'm not listening to God and I'm not doing what God's telling me to do, then your prayer might not get answered. Now, I think God's big enough and I think he'll use somebody else, but God uses people. And so as much as you got to pray, I got to be obedient to follow God. And then I love this example that I didn't really think about. Any of you guys go to Living Word? I know it's not a big deal. I know a lot of different churches represented. So some of you might have seen me around a little bit. My wife and I are now helping in the youth group and the young adult ministry. So if you do see me down at the youth group sometime, come say hi for sure. I'm not super outgoing, so I might not come find you, but if you come talk to me, I'm a nice person, so I'll talk to you. But the other day, I was actually thinking about this thoughts and prayers, and Pastor Dustin did a message. It was right after the death of Dante Wright here in Brooklyn Center. And he did a message about prayer, and he told the story of Gideon. And I love what he said about Gideon. How many of you guys know the story of Gideon? See, a few of you guys. I'm not going to tell you the whole story here for time, but if you haven't heard the story of Gideon, if you know the story of Gideon, then you know that he was like he called himself like the weakest person in the weakest family. So he didn't have very high expectations for himself. But in this story, his people were held captive, and they were being oppressed by another nation, right? And so here in Judges 6, if you want to look it up yourself, but in verse 13 and 14, Gideon is hiding in the wine press because he's scared, he's upset, he's frustrated with everything going on. And an angel comes to him. And Gideon says to the angel, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles which our fathers told us about? Saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and deliver us into the hand of the Midianites." So if we can be honest, has anybody in the room said something like that in the last year? I've said it maybe once a week. God, where are you? What's going on right now? I've heard about all these miracles in the past. Like some of you, I grew up in this church, so I grew up in a good church. I saw God move. I heard of miracles. I absolutely believe in all that stuff. But I've definitely had moments of frustration with God where I'm like, but where are you now? Where is all this stuff you've been talking about? And if you've been there before, and those are the prayers that you've had when I was talking about thoughts and prayers, if those are the prayers you've had, I've been there. But the angel's response to him, maybe not what Gideon wanted to hear, but the angel turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" So what this says, and what Dustin reminded me of, is Gideon had no idea that he was about to be the answer to his own prayers. And he's complaining to God, which, side note, God's not afraid of you complaining to him. If you got questions, he's not afraid. Read Psalms. David the whole time, every other verse is like, "God, I hate this, but I worship you." Like every other Psalms is David complaining. So God's not afraid of your complaints. But if you go to God and you complain and you say, "Hey, God, do something," just be ready. His answer might be, "I sent you to do something." And this could be in this scale, his people are in captivity. And if you don't know the story of Gideon, he does actually rise up an army and overthrow the Midianites and frees his people, even though he thought of himself as weak. And it's a really good story if you want to read the whole thing. There's a lot of good stuff. It's in Judges 6, like I said. But Gideon he was sitting there crying, complaining to God, had no idea that he was the answer to his own prayers. So the number one thing from this that I want you to get is the power of prayer and understanding how important that is. Big things, small things, pray about it. The second thing is you might be the answer to your own prayers. God might use you to answer your own prayers. I said he uses people, right? He might want to use you. In this case, he used Gideon. He was the answer to his own prayers. So you might be praying about something, and I might be praying about something, and God might move on you to do something and help me out, but he might tell me to do it myself. He might tell me, "This is what you need to do." And not like God's going to say, "Well, just buck up and do it yourself and be tough." He might try to encourage you to be strong, but he might give you an idea that you never thought about. Or he might, maybe you're praying about social injustice you see in the world right now. God might say, "Well, why don't you start this nonprofit? Why don't you get these people together and help break the cycle that you see of poverty and racism in your own backyard?" God might tell you to do something. And so when I say, are thoughts and prayers enough? Thoughts, I don't care. Prayers, absolutely. Just remember that when you pray, there's probably going to be something that God's asking you to do. And I'm talking on a global scale, something that maybe affects all of us, that maybe in middle school you're not thinking about that yet, or maybe you are, but maybe you're like, okay, that's that out there, but I got my own things to deal with. I have a hard enough time getting through the day that I'm not really thinking in this global perspective of all the things that are going on in the world, and I get it for sure. Sometimes it's hard to have empathy for other people out there when you're like, but I'm going through stuff. But in that, if you're going through something, first of all, pray about it. I don't care if it's you're having a hard time getting along with a kid at school, if you feel lonely or depressed or just anxiety, whatever that is, pray about it. And there might be a spiritual, the Holy Spirit can come in and move in ways you never thought, and he might just take that depression away or that anxiety away. And he might move on somebody's heart to deal with your situation with your family or your friends. But he might also give you an idea to do something to actually make a difference, to actually help that. Maybe he tells you, maybe he's going to tell you, this person you're fighting with, he's going to tell you, why don't you go sit by them at lunch? Why don't you give them a hug? Why don't you give them a couple bucks? And I think that might change everything. That person you might be fighting with that person because they might be mad because their parents are going through a divorce and they feel lonely and they don't know what to do, and they feel like nobody sees and nobody cares. And you going to sit by them might make all the difference in the world. So God uses people, right? So the 2 points that I want you to walk away with today is I absolutely believe in the power of prayer, but I also believe in doing something. So pray, let God tell you something to do, and then do it. I talked about, hearing the voice of God. A lot of us, we think it's so difficult because we think God is so distant. But if you take the time to pray and you actually take the time to listen, I promise you God's going to speak to you. I promise you, in big things and little, he will tell you what to do, and he will give you the answer to your prayers. It just might not look like you wanted it to. Like I said, sometimes your prayer might be answered by me. Sometimes my prayer might be answered by you, but sometimes God might have you answer your own prayer in a big thing or a little thing. And we might look at everything going on in the world and say, maybe it's too much. What can I do? Or we might even get really excited and say, I want to do something. I want to change the world. I want to make a difference. But I want to encourage you that how you change the world is by changing your world. So God might give you, like I said, an idea for a nonprofit to help social justice. He might give you something big. Some of you might start something big, do amazing things, and you'll all do amazing things. But more often than not, God's going to give you something that you can do now in your world right now, and you can affect change where you are. Maybe it is helping with racial tensions, but maybe it's not something big like, oh, I'm going to go out there and make sure all of them get along, but I'm going to impact the people around me, and I'm going to do my best to reach out to the people that are hurting in my own backyard, in my school, in my family, in my friends, and I'm going to do the best to stand up against the racial injustices that I might see in my own circle. And that's how we can affect. It's because when all of us affect our worlds, then our worlds connect and we affect the world and we change the world. So a lot of us might either be trying to change the world or we're overwhelmed at the idea of trying to change the world. But I just want to encourage you, how can you change your world? What can you do to change your world and have the impact on the people around you and in your own life? So big or small, do what God tells you to do, and you can change the world around you. So in everything, pray first and foremost, but then God might give you something to do. More often than not, he'll give you something to do. And maybe he's giving you something to answer your own prayers. But like I said, you might be answering my prayers. I might be over here praying, begging for God to move in my life, to do something. I might need something so bad from God. And that's why it's so important. You might have the answer for what God has for me. So it's so important that you are also hearing from God and listening to God and developing that relationship with God, because somebody might be missing out. Like I said, God's big enough and he'll find a way to get it to me. He's not going to let me suffer for that. But God wants to use you. God uses people and he wants to use you.